This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. If you're checking out this video, you are looking at one of our Candid Talks with Grads sessions on interpersonal conflict, where I will be talking, and then Sherry Billets is going to be taking over and talking for a little bit. And hopefully you'll learn a bit about having to navigate conflict and some of the resources that are available to you as well. So what are some common situations that could pop up for graduate students in relation to conflict? You know, we as people we have relationships, friends, and other life aspects, and we do, of course, sometimes have to deal with conflict with others outside of school, but these are some examples of situations that pop up at school specifically. So the first one on the list is conflict between graduate students and their supervisors or advisors, and maybe committee meeting members as well. This is unfortunately something that I see come out quite frequently. Sometimes this conflict is the result of, not quite seeing eye to eye on how a research project should be done, intellectual property logistics, communication on expectations and boundaries, and sometimes more serious issues related to, things like verbal abuse or discriminatory comments. I would not be surprised if someone here today is here because they have been experiencing issues with a relationship present in their grad life or something along these lines. The second one I have listed here is about the conflict that sometimes arises between grads and course instructors, whether that be a course that you yourself are taking or being a TA for an instructor. Conflict here might come up because of issues that I mentioned earlier, or perhaps it comes up because of things like, disagreeing on instructors' grading or assignment structure or whatever else rolls into that. Next up, we have conflict with other students. And I don't necessarily just mean like undergrads when they come to your office, for example. Sometimes people face conflict with, lab mates or classmates in grad school for whatever reason. But the top thing that comes to mind for me when I think of this is a conflict that sometimes comes up between TAs and undergraduate students. Many grads, if they have been TAing for a long time, most likely have at least one situation that they remember that involves a student coming to your office or emailing you, upset about a mark or whatever else was done in a classroom. The last examples I have listed here is conflict with other members of the university community. So scenarios that might fall under here include things like conversations with HR or financial services about not getting paid your scholarship money, or perhaps disagreeing on university policies or other actions or situations that might pop up. Or maybe looking at conflict with other academics that might be in the form of issues that pop up, with journal editors or perhaps conference organizers. So not just necessarily at your school, but maybe in academia in general. Now, I'm pointing all this out. I don't mean to assign blame in these situations. Whatever the issue is, it is not necessarily, always someone else's fault or your fault or anyone's fault in particular, although sometimes it is. But these are examples of conversations that I've seen pop up with grad students. All right, so some tips. Here are some quick tips that might help in a situation where you're facing conflict. One, understand that conflict is natural. Sometimes in life, it just happens. People are not always going to see eye to eye, be excellent at communication, or respect others. It's going to pop up. Now, by saying that, I don't mean that you should just let people abuse situations and treat you poorly, or for us all to treat others in a disrespectful way. I just mean that it does happen. Two, step back and analyze the situation. I think many of us have been in that boat or at some point in their lives where conversation has gotten a bit heated and things were said or done that we regretted after, or we wish we had thought of doing something or saying something else, which is why this is kind of important. But taking a breath and stepping back, you can think more about why this conflict is happening, where both parties or all parties might be coming from, including yourself, what you want to do next, what you want to happen, how you can get there, and if you need help to move this situation forward. Number three, using neutral language. I know it can be hard not to, in some situations just be like, beep you, you're stupid, and resort to, harsh name calling or profanity, especially if the conversation has gotten, very heated. But the reality is that in most cases, it's going to add wood to the fire and continue to build that heat. By using neutral and less negatively charged language and trying to stay as objective as possible, you will most likely stand a better shot at coming to a resolution and saving the relationship in the future, if that is your plan. And quite honestly, looking at it from a different perspective, using this tip can also work to your advantage if the issue escalates to the point where other parties have to be brought in, for example, through university policies or the police down the line. The fourth thing I want to mention is to share your expectations and boundaries up front and just communicate in general. Sometimes people are experiencing a conflict, but the other person they're angry with isn't even aware that there is an issue because they aren't aware that they are failing expectations or crossing boundaries, which is why it's good to be upfront with these things. And when conflict arises, in many situations, that first best course of action is to bring it to the attention of the person you're experiencing conflict with. 5, in order to do all the things above, you need to actively listen to understand everything that is happening and where the other person is coming from as well. And 6, lastly, ask for help when needed, which leads us to the last part of my talk, the resources. So here are just a list of some resources that you might come across at UW that can help you kind of manage conflict and whatever else is related to the conflict. So things you can contact like us at the Graduate Student Association, Empower Me, you can contact Counselling Services, you can contact the Conflict Management and Human Rights Office, people in your department or faculty, like your grad coordinator, your supervisor, your instructors, your chair, your dean, depending on, what the issue entails. You could talk to people like the Office of Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs, friends, families, colleagues, whoever might be relevant and be able to provide you with some help there. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand things off to Sherry now.
Great, thanks so much, Ashley. And I think you really covered so many aspects of reasons for grad student conflict and just some different avenues that people can take depending on the nature of the conflict. I really like that you said some things are discriminatory and there might be reasons why somebody would go to the Conflict Management and Human Rights Office. So my slides are more for when it's not so much human rights issues, but it's more typical kinds of conflict that are not discriminatory in nature, and when you're looking to work with the other person and it's appropriate to work with the other person. I really like that Ashley highlighted just how normal conflict is, because it happens in all of our lives, even when we're trying not to have conflict. A lot of times it can lead to misunderstandings. We might have assumptions about another person, and we might just have different conflict management styles. So this is just one graphic, but you can find other ones on conflict styles. You can even take some quizzes online to find out your own conflict style. And I think it's really important to highlight that sometimes we just have different conflict styles at different times, given the situation. So you might have more of a competitive conflict style at times when you're looking to lead a project, or you're needing to volunteer for something. Those are sometimes when you might have to be more competitive, because you might have to actually compete against others for that role. But you may notice that you have a style that you gravitate toward. So it's the ideal would be that you have an emphasis on the relationship and emphasis on the task, so that you're taking both into account. So the ones that are more on the assertive side of things would be when it's more about the task and less about the relationship. So you're more trying to get a desired outcome, and you're not so focused on the relationship with the other person. Where along the cooperativeness continuum would be when you're focusing on the relationship and others' needs. So there's going to be times when it's important to have all of these different styles, but some that would bode well in most relationships are ones that are more compromising, more collaborating, and there might be times when you need to accommodate, where it's kind of like, this is not an issue that I need to fight for right now, so I may just have to give in for the sake of the relationship. So I just give you this as something you could think about when you think about maybe a conflict that you're having, and it's like, what is the other person's style? What am I seeing from them, and where am I coming at this? So if I'm coming from an avoiding standpoint and they're trying to collaborate, this could just be one way of viewing the conflict through. How am I coming across? Does it seem like I'm not emphasizing the relationship and I'm more focused on my own needs? Or am I focused on both what I need to get the task and the relationship? So just one tool for you to think about when you think about any current conflicts that you're having in your life. So Ashley, you can go to the next slide. This is something that I found very helpful, and I've used with lots of students, but also with myself. And it's a tool from Byron Katie. So she's a therapist, and she's developed just 4 simple questions. And this is really when you want to do your own self-work. And when you find yourself making assumptions about the other person. And Ashley had said, what are some reasons why sometimes we have conflict? And sometimes it is we just have formed an assumption. We think that person is avoiding me, so my supervisor is not getting back to me because of X. And meanwhile, we don't necessarily know if it's true, but we believe it to be true. And when we believe something's true, we start acting in a certain way. So in the case of conflict, and if you're doing your own self-work around, what do I think might be going on here? The first is to really analyze, what are the assumptions that I'm holding about the other person and where I believe they're coming from. So I see you have probably 2 options, maybe more, but 2 that come to mind. One would be that you could ask the other person and say, you know what, I kind of noticed I have this assumption, and can I check it out with you? And obviously in some relationships, like your partner, friend, ones that have less of a power imbalance, I could see that would be easier to do. So it's easier to check out an assumption with a friend than it might be with your supervisor. But for ones that have a power imbalance, or that person, is grading you or has the ability to, have a big influence on your success, that's a harder question sometimes to ask. So you may want to go through these 4 questions just to check out your assumptions on your own end. So the first is just to ask yourself, is it true? This assumption that I'm holding. So I believe my supervisor is purposely avoiding me. So then you'll say, well, yeah, I do think that because I've emailed them twice and they never got back to me. So then the next question would be, can you absolutely know that it's true? So then when you sit with that question, oftentimes the answer is no, because we can't absolutely know what someone else is thinking. So then when we reach that question, you say, well, no, there could be other reasons that this could be happening. Then the third question is, how do I react when I think that thought? So when I jump to a conclusion or an assumption that someone is doing something purposefully toward me, how do I start to act? And then I can look inwardly at all my behaviors. So maybe I'm starting to avoid myself. Maybe I'm, getting very upset or anxious, or I'm starting to, send multiple emails now because I'm believing this to be true. So it really helps us just analyze, when I believe that thought, how do I react in turn to that thought? And then the last is, who would I be without that thought? So once you kind of walk through all these steps and you get to step 4, it's really looking at, okay, wow, like I've made this assumption. My behavior has been really altered. What if I'm wrong? What if my assumption isn't true and I've now been engaging in all these different behaviors? What if I didn't believe that? What if I thought maybe there's something going on in their life that I don't know about? Maybe that person is caring for a sick child and I didn't know. And we start to really think of other options and other alternatives. Then it's helping us not personalize and work through our own part in the conflict. So maybe we can actually see, when we've gone through these steps, like, I've contributed to this conflict that I'm having because I've engaged in these behaviors. And maybe I need to either try to check it out or just be open to the fact that I don't have all the pieces, and watch what assumptions that I'm making toward others. So we can go to the next slide. So this one is, it feeds into a little bit of what Ashley shared, and I love using these in counseling sessions, and I especially love using them when there's 2 people and I'm meeting with them and they're having conflict. And we can talk about, I can just listen to them go back and forth, and I'll fill this out on my own and then share it with them. But you can use it as a model just in when you're thinking about a person that you're having conflict with. So part of it is looking at the positions, interests, and needs that are happening in the conflict. So Ashley had said, sometimes we're like, that person is just, and then fill in the blank. So when you look at that word bubble at the top, those are when we've become so exacerbated by the conflict that we start just assigning labels to the other person. So now we're like, that person's just, and usually it could be a swear word, or it could be just lazy, or just really incompetent, or just an ass, or whatever we might fill in the blank up there. That's usually when we become so frustrated that now we're almost at that slinging words at each other in the conflict. But the position is really, what is it that I am trying to explain? What is it that I'm saying? What am I hearing the other person saying in that conflict? So that's really the tip of the iceberg. And usually when we're having conflict with people, we only know about 10% of what is really going on for them, and we're only listening to whatever it is that they're trying to argue. So the position is really, what are we arguing about here? So when you're listening to the other person, you can kind of figure out what is it that they're trying to say and what is their position on whatever we're in conflict about. So you can kind of fill this out on your own, and even you might be based on some assumptions, but what do I hear this other person trying to say? The interests and needs are the deeper underlying things that are happening during the conversation. So needs are like our core needs. So those would be like a need for belonging, a need to be heard and seen, a need for security, a need for autonomy. So there's sort of 5 or 6 basic needs that are usually at play in a conflict. And a lot of times we're not talking about those. So we're trying to be right, and we're arguing our point, which is up at the very top of the position level. So it's trying to really work at, what is it that this person, like, what is going on in this conflict that's deeper than just this position that we're fighting about. The trick in this whole model, and even if you take one thing away from this model, is really the overlapping part between the 2 triangles at the bottom. So when you see in the needs section, those 2 overlapping areas, that's where there's an opportunity to really change the narrative and what you're talking about. So if you find you're arguing with someone and you're going back and forth and you're trying to get your own needs met, and you find you're just not seeing not understanding one another, a good question to ask is, what do we agree on? What is it that we both want here? Because that can really shift the whole emphasis of the conversation. So if it happens to be some conflict that you're having with a supervisor, and like Ashley said, very normal. There's lots of reasons why there can be conflict that would develop in that relationship. Sort of like, what do we both want? And hopefully the answer is, we both want for me to be successful. We both want, maybe it's this publication to go through. Maybe there could be a whole host of different other things that you and your supervisor could both want. And if you focus on that, usually you can redirect the conversation to be like, this is where I see that we agree. How can we build upon this? Or how can we get to where we want to go? Because I think we're both saying a lot of the same things here. So this can really be a good tool, and I use it a lot with team members who are not getting along, or I've used it in couple counseling or roommate disputes, really looking at what is it that you both want, and how can we really focus on that versus going back and forth and trying to be right up at the position level. So I just wanted to share a few tools. So some are more introspective in nature, so really getting you to look at what assumptions you might be holding, and trying to interrogate your own kind of thought process around that and the ways that you behave. And others are just trying to help you focus on, what are the commonalities here? What are the ways we can come together and maybe not get stuck in our positions? Because oftentimes any conflict is usually we have a need to be right. So really looking at, what do we both want? And then the other one, the first one that I shared, is really to get you to think of, what is my conflict style? How does that help and how does it hinder? So if you find that you're a competing person, are there times when you need to move along to be more collaborative, to compromise, because the relationship means more than getting my way? And sometimes no, sometimes we need to be very competitive and at the expense of the relationship. So it just gets you to think a little bit more broadly about what's happening, how you're going about doing that, and what is it that you really want, and what are you trying to communicate and convey. So I hope these tools are helpful. If anyone wants to reach out and talk some more about anything to do with conflict resolution, I'm happy to be available. As Ashley said, my name's Sherry Billets and I work at the Counselling Center here at the University of Waterloo, and happy to chat through some of these different slides and different conflict resolution tools that can be helpful with your current situation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And that's totally a good point, that they might, like, the styles that you might have to take on in a situation might kind of shift depending on the circumstance or what your needs are and what the whole situation is. And the thing about conflict, I guess it could be so challenging to even when you know, like, the resources and you know, like, the strategies that you should use in conflict, it can definitely be, as humans, like, hard to actually use them in the moment, because of course we all, you know, have emotion and it's hard to step back sometimes. But even I learned so much from this presentation. Thank you so much, Sherry.
Thank you. Yeah. I learned a lot from your slides as well, Ashley. Thank you.
Thanks. But yeah, hopefully everyone who's watching this video, that you, if you're dealing with a conflict right now, that you reach out to Counselling Services, like Sherry mentioned, or you can reach out to us at the Graduate Student Association. We offer, like, confidential advising sessions. So if you're dealing with, like, conflict with a supervisor, we can help you kind of navigate what goes into that. But yeah, we hope you'll have a great day, and good luck with any conflict that you have to face in the future.